Hi everyone, and welcome to Pro Tools Answers, where three Pro Tools experts, well, four in this case, discuss, demonstrate and elaborate on your Pro Tools questions put to the community in Avid's official Facebook support forum. Anders, Andy and myself, Dave, take you deep into the workings of Pro Tools technique and ethos to help the user community understand and get the best out of their investment, and we hope that our tutorials, our discussions and our channel are doing just that. Anders has been over in the UK visiting this week. He's at Salford University running an instructor course for Pro Tools 310, and in this episode we're going to be welcoming on a long-time viewer, long-time fan, first-time caller of the show and instructor that Anders is upgrading this week. Welcome Alex Miller. Hi Alex.
Hello, how's it going?
It's lovely to have you here. It's lovely to see you. And we're going to be discussing a topic today of your suggestion, actually. Things that new users and students frequently struggle with in Pro Tools. Really interesting one. You know, obviously you've been doing this course. I think you've been going since Monday, and right now you're on a lunch break. It's Thursday. So coming to the end, I think.
By the way, so for anybody who doesn't know certification, 310M is the expert certification. And it's the hardest, literally, it's all the stuff that we thought was unfairly too hard, right? So it's all the stuff we threw in there. I've only ever seen one man break down in tears because of the stress of an exam, and it has been on an expert exam. But I'm sure you'll do fine.
Well, I think Alex has been through it before, right? This is just an upgrade to become an instructor rather than an expert.
So
is that right?
No, the first time I did it, it was when it was version 10, so we didn't have the practical exam because Avid, I think it was removed for that one.
Okay.
For that one bit. But yeah, so yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Right, well, Anders tells us that you're pretty amazing with the software and pretty amazing teacher. So you've got nothing to worry about.
Actually, to tell the truth here, we've been pretty busy and we've almost finished everything. So so it's been doing great so far.
And to be fair, you do have the best Avid Master Instructor in that room right now.
Thank you, Dave.
It was frightening when he was listing off the courses that he teaches, and I was like, should we just talk about what you don't teach? That might be quicker.
My comment was actually a poke at Anders, but it didn't come off that way.
I got it, of course.
Because it could have been taken, he's in the room or in the room, doesn't matter. Anyway, I think Anders wanted to kick off this discussion, things that students and new users usually get wrong, and that includes teacher students as well, right, Andy?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's a great topic because there are things that people tend to get wrong. When I was thinking about, we talked about that during this course as well, is one of the misunderstood things is the relationship between sample rate and bit depth and that is something that is in the Pro Tools 101 class, and I think it's great to have it in the course, but it's something that people generally, or not generally, but some people struggle with.
I think in Frank's book it was only kind of skipped over briefly, wasn't it? I think Andy has gone into a lot more detail in the new releases.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So my complaining is going to be about teaching teachers because that's usually what I do, and I'll usually start off the class by saying, so what's better, high sample rates or low sample rates? Hands go up. High sample rates. Great. Why? Complete dead silence because they have no idea why, right? And if you can't, especially as a teacher, if you can't tell folks why what you think is right, then your knowledge is incomplete, right? So we then go into Nyquist frequency. We go into the depths of what makes a higher sample rate better, and where do you draw that line, right? And most people, students don't know, but they can be excused. Teachers really.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. You had an interesting one as well.
Which we talked about a couple. Which one in particular? I found people coming from different DAWs often struggle with the concept of the Pro Tools alternate tools and how the grabber isn't just a grabber. The grabber is really the time grabber usually. But if you come from Logic, it's really everything that you grab in Logic is working as if it was an object grabber. And one of the things that I think frustrates people the most is when they're grabbing things and moving them, say, between tracks, and then it's just obliterating everything that's in the selection that they're going to, and they're like, how can't I do this? And it's like, okay, well, I mean, we have been over this, you'll come across it in the 110 or something, like, there's alternate tools that if you flick through, that'll get you out of what you need to be able to do. So, like, use the object grabber, flick between that, or the different kinds of different trim tools and such. Like, they're just underutilized, and kind of people often forget that they're there, but they are, really useful.
Totally agree.
No, I get a lot. People just don't understand how to use the separation grabber. I mean, usually folks will. You can explain to them the time grabber, right? So that it grabs a block of time. The object grabber, obviously, if you think of a clip as an object, then that makes sense. But you can then change to the separation grabber, which is the one with the scissors. You click on a clip, and it just grabs it. It doesn't. It doesn't obviously lead to a workflow. And I think the only time that it really starts to make sense is when you're using, for example, the Smart tool, or you select a region and then you cup in. But it's one of those things that it's an alternate tool that I think a lot of people just go click it and they're like, doesn't make any sense, moving on, and they'll never use it again, right?
Can I ask you guys just general conversation about the separation tool? Because I love that tool, but I stopped using it a good number of years ago, because whenever I was using that tool, I would find that MIDI notes would split in two, just in random places in the session. Have you ever seen this?
I haven't.
No, I haven't either. No.
I might jump back into it and just see whether it's working okay, but I found it in a couple of versions. I spotted it in 9, I think, originally, and it's still persisted for a couple of things. But it's a great tool. I love it. Just the ability just to click on a thing and it instantly separates and move it around and make things so very easy.
Since this is kind of a free-ranging discussion, if you're seeing things happen to MIDI notes that you're not directly working on, the thing I would look at is mirrored MIDI editing. Which is that little button at the top where you can, and when it's enabled, then what you do to one clip on the timeline will happen to all instances of that clip elsewhere, which is great. It's fantastic for like drum loops and stuff like that. But if you don't know how it thinks, you can get confused.
Yeah, this definitely wasn't that. This was working on audio clips and random notes across the timeline. There'd be a separation of notes that I wouldn't do. There'd be no reason to do it, but it was only when I was working with separation grabber. Anyway, I digress, and I apologize for it.
Yeah, we both were talking about this huge problem with where students save their file, or the lack of understanding of file structure. And we had this amazing discussion about this, like, why don't they know how to save stuff? And we have a theory.
We do. I mean, we thought maybe because when I was kind of like growing up, computers and the internet were just coming about. So like lots of people were, there was computer classes at school, and we had all of that kind of computer training. Whereas now everything at home, very few people like have desktop computers at home. It's kind of all iPads and things, isn't it? And kind of tablets and phones and whatnot. That does everything that you need to be able to do. Where you can save anywhere. Like it just saves where it wants to. It doesn't have to you don't have to specify a location. You don't have to remember where it is. Everything's just in its own little bubble. So when you come to files and things that are on a computer, it's like it's the first time they've ever had to actually think about where things are going to end up when they finished using them, I think, which is really like
you're 100% right, 0% wrong. And the other thing too is if you're coming from other products, even other Avid products, the way they deal with the storage of media is completely different. So for example, if you use Media Composer, right, you choose the place where everything goes. And that's where it goes. And then once you make that choice, you don't really think about where your media is. You just record it, and then it puts it where you told it in the preferences. That's not the way Pro Tools works. That's the way that Pro Tools works is far more flexible and a lot more dangerous, because if you don't know where your bodies are buried, you'll never be able to find your session.
No, and one of the big, following on from your discussion, the big thing that people tend to get wrong is using the add button on import versus copying or converting, and just understanding what the differences between those three are. And what kind of perpetuates that is that if you try and import something with the same sample rate, it instantly flicks to add. And it's a natural thing to want to add a file to a session, but not realizing that it references it from its original file location. So you're putting yourself into the position of breaking your sessions very, very easily. And what I run this discussion along with sample rates, playback engine, and I/O in the first days. Whenever I get a new cohort of students, first thing I'll talk about is these things: playback engine, session setup, sample rates, and file management. What happens to all the files, and specifically talking about adding, copying, and converting.
The import audio dialog box, and because you're going, if you're seeing the add button, you're going from the file menu to the import menu to import audio, where you have the choice of adding, which refers to the file in its original location, or converting or copying the file into your session's audio files folder. At least it asks you there, right? Where it doesn't ask you is if you're dragging it in from your browser window or from a workspace. It simply will just go ahead and make an assumption. It assumes that if the sample rate of the audio and the sample rate of your session is the same, then you don't want to make duplicate versions of that file. That's the normal assumption. Now, you can get around it in the preferences and force Pro Tools to make copies whenever you duplicate, which I always 100% of the time always do. It's like the first thing I do whenever I'm doing a fresh install. I'll go to that preference, make sure it's on, because I'm a big dumb animal that will forget to do that, and then I'll move my session over, and I won't even follow my own backup advice, and I'll just move it over there, open it up a year later, and it's like 45,000 files can't be found, and then
we've all done that.
I'll always recommend that until you really understand the filing system, don't drag in. I mean, it's a very natural modern way of working these days, but until you really understand what the implications are of dragging from the Finder onto the timeline, just don't do it. Just use the import window and copy and convert until you're completely familiar with what happens.
But get familiar, because dragging in from Finder in the browser window is not fantastic. But the workspace browser is the untold hero of finding stuff that you're looking for.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely not the most glamorous feature when you're teaching it, at least anyway. But if you need to find anything on that system, Workspace browser's got it.
Do you know,
100%.
It's funny, subjects like this are not sexy to talk about at all, and they're not what people are there for, but they're so fundamentally important, because the moment that you break a session, or you're regularly breaking sessions, you're breaking what clients are paying for.
Unfortunately, guys, I have to break it to you. I don't think people are coming to Pro Tools Answers for sexy.
Well, I don't know.
We've got you, Andy.
I mean, except for look at the guns on Anders. Come on.
I know. I've bought tickets to that gun show.
Yes, he's buying his shirts at Baby Gap, but his arms look fantastic.
No, it's all CGI.
Okay, so we've got another one. Are you ready for this?
We're sitting down.
Not using shortcuts. Okay, and we think this is also a bit of the iPad thingy. Like, there is a button to press to play back in Pro Tools, so why not press it? And stuff like that. When there is something that you can do in the menu, a lot of students do that instead of learning a couple of shortcuts that will speed up their workflow. We see this all the time.
It's astounding. I've actually had people grab the mouse, try to find the mouse, and then go over the screen to try to find the OK button, right? I mean, enter key. Just hit the enter key. It's not even a Pro Tools shortcut. And people just cannot get away from the mouse.
100%.
Yeah.
Again, but like when you start using it, I think it's difficult, because I remember I started years and years and years ago in Cubase, and then I came to Pro Tools and I was just like, wow, getting hit with all of these different shortcuts, a lot of which are quite similar. And if you don't make that choice to be like, I'm going to use these, I'm going to start using shortcuts and it's going to be okay, it's really hard to then think back and go, oh, I know there's a shortcut, and I do, obviously we all still do it now, don't we? Like when you're reaching, you're like, oh, there's a shortcut for this and I can't quite remember what it is. We kind of do that, and I think in the start of it, there are so many shortcuts and so many things that you're doing. It's kind of it's a steep learning curve, I think. But once you do get over it, like, that's how you get quick, isn't it? That's how you do things, like, with the speed that you need to be able to do in a session, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty integral for the exams, that's for sure.
Yeah, we want to get to that stage where Pro Tools gets more or less transparent, where the music or the audio is the thing that you're thinking about, and using Pro Tools is just an extension of yourself, right? That's where we want to come to.
Yep.
That's why we pay him the medium-sized bucks. Well, caps.
You know what? I wish students knew that they don't, is how a compressor works.
Good one.
I think there's a lot of folks who, they'll especially when it comes to compressors more and expanders, more than almost anything else, because with an EQ, you can figure it out, right? It's so graphic that people get it, but so many people will just run over to compressors and expanders and just open up a preset and then not be satisfied with it. And just understanding not only the threshold and the ratio, that's what everybody should know, but understanding really how attack and release times work. And even teachers, frankly, don't understand exactly what those do. In fact, I saw a very authoritative article on how compressors work that was completely inaccurate. I mean, it was right up there. It was, looked fantastic. It just happened to be wrong. And I'll tell you, if you want to learn how those things work, go to Isotope. Jonathan Weiner is a fantastic teacher when it comes to that kind of stuff. And of course, we've got the Avid curriculum as well. But that's one of those things. If you're a young student, compressors, limiters, dynamic effects, more than any other single effect, is one that you have to know how those parameters affect how that plugin works.
But I think that's where presets are really good for compression, because compression as a whole, like it's with EQ, if you boost the top, you hear it instantly. The top end gets brighter. Okay, fine, no problem. With compressor, you can get yourself in such a situation where you're kind of like, I don't know what's happening. I'm adjusting controls and it's all changing, and I don't know if it's better or worse. And using presets, but only looking at things like ratio, attack, and release, is how I kind of say to students, if you've never used a compressor before and you want to compress a kick drum, load a kick drum compression preset and look at how fast the attack is and look at how fast the release is, and kind of scroll through a few, and you'll notice they're all in similar kind of areas, and you'll be like, okay, well, why is that? What are we trying to do with these controls? And then, snare drums and vocals, think about these controls and what we think we know that they do, and then look at how people seem to be using them on these presets, and then that you can dial in from there, but kind of get an idea of what the unit is doing.
No, they're great. They're great. They're great starting off points. Don't get me wrong, but it's that people will just hit the preset and then not go further. That's the problem, because it's like EQ, right? There's no right EQ setting. There's no right compressor setting. It completely depends upon the audio. So as teachers, how many times do students take pictures of the screen as you're setting up your compressor settings so that they know the right settings for a compressor?
Yeah, that's great.
Quite a few times.
I'm pretty sure signal routing is a thing, but I can't think of how to vocalize it.
Can you do? Alex has a great one on this.
So we organizing your session whilst you're working and making things easy for yourself later on, such as naming audio tracks before you record, so that your files are, you need to find a kick drum. It's called kick, not audio 1_5 or something like that. And then having tracks logically grouped together in your session. There's so many times I go into students who ask me for a little bit of mix feedback, and you go in and you say, yeah, sure, so let me look at your session. Okay, this sounds a bit strange. Can you play me just the lead vocal in solo? And they're like, oh yeah, it's I think it's where is it? It's like, okay, well, just come on, man, lay it out as if it was a console, get a block of drums and a block of synths and a block of basses and a block of vocals, and then color them and name them. And if you do that the same every time, then you'll be able to get around much faster. And and it's we kind of did it as we went along, and we were being creative, and it's like, you can still be methodical and be creative, and if you do that, you'll find you've got much more room to be creative. I think if you just have something, you can grab it without thinking, you're still in the creative side of your brain, aren't you? And it's much easier and much quicker to get around.
Yeah, it's funny how thinking of the administration of your session is somehow going to have an adverse effect on the creativity. Doesn't really make much sense. or put them in tune. Why do I need to bother with that kind of stuff? Yeah, I just want to play, man.
But Yeah. And Alex, you were mentioning some hilarious stuff with routing that you've seen as well.
Yeah, people get carried away and think that they either have to route things where they route this there, that there, and everything's sidechained to everything else, and then there's buses that go to nowhere, and it's like, guys, what are we doing here? Like, why is this track feeding 3 other tracks that's then being fed back to itself? But or audio tracks that have got bus inputs at the top and things routed to them, but obviously nothing's record enabled, so you're not hearing it. And they're like, yeah, it's doing a blend thing, and you're like, it's not. Let's listen. It's definitely not. That's not how it works.
Do you know, on that similar point, the stacking of similar plugins, three or 4 EQs, a couple of compressors, and they're all kind of counteracting each other. And then if you get some subgrouping going on, even more stuff of the same on the subgroup that's just completely...
Dave, you're talking about my mixes now, right?
I wasn't going to say anything. You are a shining example.
Well, this is one thing that folks don't get. Again, going to compressors is if you take a 10-to-1 ratio, let's say, and you put another 10-to-1 ratio after it, you do not have a 20-to-1 ratio. You have 100-to-1. It's multiplicative. It's not an additive thing. And you could smash a mix real quickly.
Interesting. I mean, there are some scenarios where you can stack compressors, and smoothing out vocals, for example, can be quite nice with something soft and something soft. But there has to be a reason for everything
exactly
that you use.
I do it all the time. I'll have like different, very, very, very gentle compressors, and you'll just see the levels and the saturation just refined.
Yeah.
That's great. But when you've got 2 people with brick wall limiter and then brick wall limiter, and let's see what happens, and it just crushes everything.
Certainly one of the things that I try to get across to my guys is try and do as much as you can with as few processors as possible. Most of my work, most of my tracks, 1 EQ, 1 compressor, and it can sound great. If you can do everything with a small number of compressors, a small number of processors, that's largely going to be better than doing it with 3 or 4, right?
Especially when it gets confusing along the way. Like you said, you're boosting in 1 EQ and then it's too much, so you bring that down on the second EQ, which is just a confusing way to work. Yeah,
obviously if we're talking digital cutting and then analog boosting, those kind of things, there are some justifiable reasons, but everything that you do on a track has to be justifiable.
That's exactly right. You should know what you're doing, right? If you're going to break the rules, great, but you have to know them before you break them.
Yeah, and justifying. I'm talking about submissions now and kind of written work and stuff, but for the purposes of being able to get higher grades, is if you're going to go against the grain, and as Andy said, break rules, be very detailed in how you're justifying your actions. What is each thing specifically doing that's being a little bit different. But just sticking 4 EQs and 3 compressors onto a thing and then doing it on every track, probably wrong.
So Alex, let me turn the tables on you. What are students surprising you that they do well?
Ooh.
Wow, that's a good question. When one of the first things that they kind of really jump into, that once they kind of get a handle on it, is editing. I think I see a lot of good editing once they learn the tools and the features, and especially with things like Beat Detective, which is quite a complicated piece of software to use. Do you know what I mean? And it will do absolutely everything for you. And there's occasionally you get, Beat Detective's rubbish, it's putting everything in the wrong place. But once you've explained it to them, and it's like, no, this is exactly how it works. Like I've walked into rooms and seen people flying through it, and I'm like, wow, man, like this is incredible. You've only been using this software for 6 months, and you're, we're already in collection mode, like doing stuff like fair play. So yeah, they're really good at that. They really get on board with it. And once you show them, I find that you can do headphone mixes in Pro Tools instead of, so obviously we've got analog consoles here, but once you say, look, I do all my headphone mixes in Tools, because then if I'm in a different room, I load my session, and there they are, the exact same mixes for the, so if I'm overdubbing a vocal, here's the exact same vocal mix that we had 2 weeks ago. It's not a problem. They get really involved in that and start to think about what they're sending to the headphones, because it's visual and in front of them. Whereas opposed, if you just got a load of auxiliaries on a console, you very easily, in the stress of a session, what's going where, who's getting what, I don't know. And they can set up, templates that, so, I'm going to record a band, so they probably all want to hear this. So I'll, and then they bring it in, they load it up, and it's stress-free. Well, for the most part, when they're recording, I think they really jump into that, and they do. It took me quite a while to get into tracking into templates, but they're really quick. They seem to really enjoy doing that at the minute, which is nice.
Okay, are there any more we can discuss? We've gone on for quite a while. Is there any more gems, or I imagine you guys need to get back to it?
Alex, do you have anything more?
I don't think so. Did we?
No?
Is there anything else? I think we covered it all. I think.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks. Hopefully it'll go okay.
Yeah,
I think it's fine.
Absolutely.
Alex,
all three
Anders
of us
can be bribed.
Can he?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have to think about that.
So we'll wrap it up here. We'll say thank you very much to Alex for joining us. Really interesting topic to just kind of rattle around for a little bit. Just great to meet new people as well. It's been a real pleasure to have you here. If you haven't yet done so already, you could hit like on our video. That would be wonderful. If you could subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon as well, that'll notify you every time we release our new videos. You can also head over to protoolsanswers.com, where you can subscribe over there as well. And Andy will write to you every week with a personalized email just for you, telling you all about what we've been up to that particular week. And if you fancy taking that next step and supporting what we do at Pro Tools Answers, you can join our own inner circle as well. There's a couple of benefit tiers, and you can read all about those benefits over there. But all it leaves me to say is thank you very much to Alex and to Anders.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much to Andy.
You betcha.
As Andy said, good luck to you, Alex, and let us know how you get on. Let the community know how you get on as well. My name's Dave. This is Pro Tools Answers, and we're out.